I'm Bob Hinkles. I have 33 years of experience, did real estate partnerships, and we're just going into the next session to cover some more of the glossary. Again, I repeat, you need to go to the HUD website and look at every word that's in there and make sure you understand it. Okay? All right, the next thing I wanted to talk about was the mortgage insurance premium. Now, this is different from the mortgage insurance, okay, in this respect. The mortgage insurance premium is the premium that you have to pay, and listen carefully, you have to pay it every month that you have not put more than 20% down on the property. So for example, if I buy a house for $100,000, you can go to some banks and through federal agencies, and I can buy that house with $5,000 down, which means I have a mortgage of $95,000, which means I'm borrowing 95% of the value of the house, which means I have mortgage insurance premium. Okay? I have mortgage insurance and a mortgage insurance premium. And so what happens is you get to pay to insure your mortgage so that the bank or the financial institution can sell your mortgage on the market. Now, you might say, well, wait, I'm still sending money to the bank. Yes, you are. But they've sold it to somebody else. They've already gotten a ton of cash up front. Remember when I mentioned about my $70,000 house and it was worth $430,000 or $500,000, and so I was paying $430,000 in interest? A lot of banks discount that, take the cash now, let somebody else worry about whether or not you pay it. Okay? And why do they do that? Because they paid a mortgage insurance premium, or they have mortgage insurance, and you're going to pay the premium. And you're going to pay that premium every month until you have 20% down in the house. Now, here's the funny part. Once you have 20% down in the house, the bank's not going to tell you you reached it. Why? I don't know. That's a very good question. So you need to have a feel for when you're going to have 20% down in the house. And it might be 7, 8, 9, 10 years, but once that happens, that mortgage insurance premium is supposed to disappear. Again, read the HUD government thing, give us a call or whatever. Okay, the next thing, we mentioned this earlier, was a survey. The survey, again, is a property diagram. It shows where all the lines are and all that stuff. If you go to the Midwest, it's perfect. All of the property lines are square. Okay, it's a golden thing. In fact, if anybody's ever flown into Chicago at night and you look at the lights in the city, it looks like a checkerboard. It's perfectly square. It's unbelievable. It's like a bunch of graph paper. It looks so square. If you go into other parts of the country, okay, the best example is Pittsburgh. There's lines all over the place. There's like nothing is square. And so the survey is to help tie down all those items and where the boundary lines bend and curve, okay? But I mentioned earlier about posting or having the corners posted. One of the things that I've always done, and some of my neighbors haven't liked it, but it's of no concern of mine, is that once I know where the posts are, I actually go and put in wooden stakes that are about 2.5, 3 feet high. And then I take and I pull a string across from one stake to the other, to each of the corners, or like the lot I have now, it actually has like 7 corners because it turns around. I had 7 stakes in it, and I actually put string across the whole thing. And each of my neighbors said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm showing you where my property line is." Now, some people say, well, that's not very neighborly, blah, blah, blah. And they might be right. But I like to establish what is mine and where it belongs. So the posting is a very good idea. Then title insurance. Title insurance, again, when you go to buy a house, there's what they call a title inspection. Somebody goes and looks through the title of the property to make sure there's no liens on the property. Or not liens, I'm sorry, that somebody else doesn't own the property or have liens on the property, or your title will be bogus. And so you pay a company to do that. This is also one of the closing costs. Then what happens is you then pay a title insurance for the person who's doing the title search. So again, you're paying for their work. In case they messed up, you get to pay for the insurance. Never quite understood that, because why don't they just add it to their bill and bill me for one, but whatever. The point is that the title insurance seems like a waste of time in some respects, but every once in a while something pops up where it happened. This actually happened to us with one of my clients. They bought a property They were living in the property. It was a very nice property. It was like, 12 bedrooms, all this stuff, a mansion kind of place outside of the city, and a nice suburban, what's the word, suburban country setting. It was like right on the borderline, so it was really nice. By the way, today it's almost urban, but that's another story. But back then it was like a suburban country setting. It was a beautiful house, and all of a sudden this person showed up and said, "You have to get out of this house. This is my house." And they laughed at him and everything, but it turned out that he actually had a title that showed that his great 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 grandfather had owed that house, and that he was not his great grandfather, his grandfather, and his father were not notified that the property had lost until right before his death. His father said, "Here's the deed for the property up by that city." So he said, "I've come to get my property." And as it turned out, they went through the whole thing. It turned out he was right. It was his property. Okay, somebody had messed up on the title, 150 years ago. Okay, the title insurance then reimbursed the family for the mortgage because of all the expenses that were incurred. So that's what it's for. Again, it almost never happens, but that's why they do it. Okay, now, I have one other question to ask, which is rather interesting. Remember the mortgage insurance premium where they paid the premium so that if you don't make the payments that they cover it? Why didn't that save the housing bubble from 2010? I've always wondered that. I've never been able to wrap my hands around what happened to that money and why that didn't protect it. But that's another story. Okay, so the next question is, the next thing we're going to talk about is, what can you afford? Okay, a lot of people you say, well, it's 25% of your net take-home pay. So all you do is you take your W-2 and your wife's W-2 or your certificate, whatever. By the way, if you have single people, like let's say 3 men want to buy a home, 3 women want to buy a home, whatever, if you can put all your incomes together and you can find out what you can afford to pay there. Okay. By the way, I highly recommend you not do that for this reason and this reason only. One of the problems you have when 3 or more people who aren't related own property is that one of them wants to leave, and it sets the whole thing into a nightmare because you need somebody to replace them, but you're asking somebody to come in and do what? Assume a mortgage, and that sometimes the banks don't like it. There's so many issues involved with that. A lot of times I recommend to clients that the wealthiest family, whoever that is, that child buys the house and the rest of the people rent from them, and then they can just rotate through. Plus then the wealthiest family can save Junior's behind if something happens and he doesn't get the rent checks and whatever. You know what I'm saying? But again, no judgment involved. I'm just saying it's a quarter of the net take-home pay. So all you have to do is take it and divide it by 4. And here's the key. The most important part about that is for a lot of people, that's a decent amount of money. And in fact, to be perfectly honest, when I bought my first house, because the interest rate was 13 1/8%, I actually was putting aside 1/3 of my check for the mortgage. Okay, now, what happens when you do that? Well, that's the next statement. You have to budget your expenses. And in the seminar I do, the live seminar, we go through and I make a list of budgets and all the different things and how much money do you spend every month times the whole year, or how much do you spend the whole year and back to a month, depending on what we need to calculate your budget. And then and also I tell people, keep track of all your expenses for 6 months, and then you'll know what your budget is per se. And then once you understand that you're spending, and I say this honestly, once you understand that you're spending 30% of your income on restaurants, okay, then you know that that's like way too high and you have to adjust the way you're living. It just doesn't make sense to do that. I appreciate that restaurants are good food, but that's not how you can make your budget work, okay? And here's the thing, you can't always control your income. You can't. Now, some people say, well, I got a job, and I get a salary, and so I know what my income is. Well, that's true unless you lose your job. There's always a possibility you lose your job. And you say, yeah, well, if that happens, no budget's going to work. Well, that's true, but the point is you can't control your income, but you can control your expenses. And so remember earlier I said you're supposed to have a financial planner suggest you have 6 months of money saved. That's part of what you have to do. You have to set your budget so you're putting money aside every month for that to happen. By the way, if you put it aside and nothing happens, you just have a nest egg to be able to fall back on. Okay? The other thing too is that the market will fluctuate. You know, the interest rates are fluctuating. And by the way, so does the value of houses. All of that fluctuates every day. In fact, I'm trying to think. I want to make sure I say this correctly. In November, in October, November, December, January, February, March, housing sales are terrible. Why? Because everybody's in school. The kids are in school. Everybody's in school. Nobody's moving if you got a kid in school. Okay? But then once you get to April, then all of a sudden people are thinking about moving. There's other things going on. April, May, June. In the summer, there's activity in April, May, and June. In July and August, in some places it's too hot, so nobody does anything. Okay? But they're closing in July and August, but very few people are buying in July and August. And then September, well, that's the start of a new school year, and you're back to the original point. But in September is when the smaller homes seems to sell, like the retired couples or whatever, and things of that nature. So again, and during that ebb and flow of those times, that's when the price of the house can go up or down $10,000 or $15,000. Okay, and so that's just something you have to be aware of. Let's see, the budgets we already mentioned. Okay, the next thing, again, what can you afford? It's called I call it a PITI payment. It's P-I-T-I. The P stands for the principal in the mortgage. The I stands for the interest. The T stands for the real estate taxes. And the last I stands for the homeowner's insurance that you purchase for them. Okay? Now, the taxes and the insurance go in your escrow account. Remember I mentioned my mortgage was $700 and my mortgage payment's $1,100. So every month when I send a check to the bank, they take $400 and they put it into a savings account to pay for my real estate taxes and my homeowner's insurance when it comes due. Okay? Now, when you borrow money, you're expected to pay it back along with interest, and that's what the principal and interest is. And there's all kinds of amortization things you can buy on or use on the internet for free and stuff. I mean, we have several of those things at our CPA firm, and you can even do it in Excel if you have an Excel spreadsheet. There's a loan amortization there. A couple things for the insurance for the house. Notice your homeowner's insurance will be for the purchase value of your house. In other words, if you bought your house for $100,000, the insurance will be $100,000. Okay? But there's a couple of things that you want to remember. Remember that the house is going to appreciate in value, and you also have to be worried about replacement costs. The replacement costs are always higher than purchase costs. Why? Because what you're purchasing is already a used house. And yes, I know they built it for $30,000 back in 1941, but it has a value of $100,000 now, and it will have a higher value in a few years. So what you have to be aware of is that now some insurance companies automatically increase the coverage of your house to what they have, and I want to warn you about this. The insurance companies are not the knight on the white horse here either. Insurance companies, I found out, have a tendency to list replacement value at like way over what it would cost to rebuild the house. I had a client who came to me, he purchased the house for $250,000. By the way, it was brand new, so it cost $250,000. And his insurance company wanted him to insure for $350,000. Now, the point is that there's no reason to insure for $350,000 if it's a brand new house. You see, in other words, the $250,000 is the value. There's not like a whole lot, and he already paid that much. Now, my house, remember I told you it was like $140,000, okay? It would cost $225,000 to build it because it's almost the exact same size as the $250,000 house, but it's just in an older neighborhood and older everything, older, you know, older. But if I were to rebuild it, it would cost the same amount. So it's important to be aware. I'm not saying that insurance companies are trying to cheat you, but you have to be aware that the replacement value is something you have to recalculate yourself and talk to people. Okay, this means that if you bought a house for $75,000 and 3 years later it burns down, you'd want to make sure you had enough money to rebuild it. Okay, if you don't, you're only going to get that $75,000. Okay, now again, personally, that might be enough. That might be enough for a down payment for the next house. By the way, one other thing, just to lighten up the discussion a tiny bit, one of the nice things about buying your first house is that when you sell it, you usually make money, and you can use that as a deposit for the next house, which actually, even though the house costs more, it can actually lower your mortgage. And that's a really exciting thing, to be aware that that could happen. Okay? The other thing too, remember, homeowners insurance does not include personal property. By the way, it does include some personal property. But for example, I had a client where the homeowner, I think he was in a house like $300,000, and his coverage for his personal assets in his home was 10% of the coverage, which was $30,000. Okay, but there's only one tiny problem. He had over $100,000 of specialized jewelry. Okay? Now, as fate would have it, his house did burn down, and they would not replace the $100,000. So what you have to do is you have to get a thing called a rider, okay, an insurance rider. And what you do is you actually add things to it to cover specific things. For example, my wife has a very special, her engagement ring she designed herself, and we built it, and we had a jeweler make it and all that stuff, okay? And it's worth a decent amount of money, okay? And when I looked at my insurance policy, I thought, okay, I don't ever, if something ever happens to that ring, I want to be able to replace it. And we have photos of it so it could be reproduced, blah, blah, blah. But the point is that I have a special rider for that. Now, I threw in my wedding ring. I have a high school ring that I threw in because it was rather unique, and I don't even know if they make them anymore because the high school closed. There's a whole bunch of things that we have listed separately, and I just want you to be aware that that might happen. Now, when you first move into a house, you got nothing, right? I understand that. But be aware that as time goes on, you might want to think about this rider thing, okay? And by the way, some of the stuff, I had another client where they actually had almost $1 million of antiques in their house. Now, the good news is you would never steal it because when you walked into the house, it's just like old junk. Antiques are part of that cute saying, beauty's in the eye of the beholder, okay? The point being is that, but the antiques were worth, seriously, like $100,000. It was just amazing. And some of them were absolutely stunningly beautiful. Again, you need a rider to cover that. That's not covered under the homeowner's insurance. Also, if you have any collections, one of the stupid things that I have, that my wife and I have, is a collection of what they call string people. I won't get into all the explanation for it because we don't have time. But the bottom line is, I think I have one of the largest collections of string people in the United States of America. Why? Because nobody else collects them. Okay, but again, I have those insured because it's worth something. It's worth more than just the. It's not something that's normal. See, if a stove burns up, everybody knows there was a stove in there, but nobody knows that I have string people in there worth X thousands of dollars. Okay, all of this stuff needs to be discussed with your insurance agent. It's very important. And again, your insurance agent should become your friend. Make sure that you do not. Okay, let me stop. No, they shouldn't become your friend, but they should act as a friend. Okay, and they should help you and work with you to do the best they can for the things that you have going on. But they can also give you insights into other things that you can do. Okay, the next thing that I wanted to talk about is a thing called points. I didn't mention the glossary because I'm mentioning it here. Points. When you go to buy a house, you can have. And by the way, points are used sometimes now, but not that often. Points are an item that's used to reduce the interest rate. For example, remember when I told you that my mortgage was at 13.125%? Okay? Had I paid 1 point, I could have reduced that to 11%. If I had paid 2 points, I could have reduced it to 10.5%. But here's what happens. A point is 1% of the mortgage. So notice, if I had a $100,000 mortgage, if I wanted to pay a point, I would pay $1,000. If I wanted to pay 2 points, I would pay $2,000. Now, What happens is when the interest rate gets lowered, and again, you would have to run this through those loan amortization schedules that you're going to find on the internet, okay? Or there's the software we use at our firm is called T-Value. T-Value, I think it's 5 now, I don't know. But the point is that there's software out there that you can do this. What you want to do is you want to calculate how much will you save if you pay $2,000 in points. Like how much will the monthly payment drop, okay? Now, if you listen carefully, when you pay the points, you will save a lot of interest. A lot of interest. Because if you can lower it, the principal is going to get paid off faster, okay? But now, here's the point that I want to make. When you're using the loan amortizations, instead of paying the points, put the money against the principal and see what the difference is. Almost nobody puts it against the principal. For example, I buy a $100,000 house, I put $5,000 down. I got a $95,000 mortgage. Okay, let's say it's at 4%. All right, if I pay points, I reduce the rate from 4 to 3.5. Okay, the question becomes, if I took that $2,000 and instead of paying the points to reduce the rate, if I put it into the principal, would it reduce the payments as much? By the way, the answer is usually no. But you need to do that so you see how much more money you're saving. Now, there's another reason that I bring this up, and that's very important. If you pay points, it's going to take you 7 to 10 years to get that money back. You know the points that you paid? Again, I'll say this again. If you pay points, it's going to take you 7 to 10 years to get the money back that you paid in the points. Listen carefully. What's the national average for people staying in their house? 7 years. So if you need to calculate, will I get back my points in 7 years? If not, then if you're the national average, you will have, if it takes you longer to get it back, okay, then by the way, it's okay if it takes longer as long as you stay in the house, but follow what happens. What if you leave at 6 years? You see you paid the points for no apparent reason? In other words, you didn't even get back your points, which again is why I suggest you consider paying it against the principal instead of the points. Again, points are not that used that often. I haven't seen points in a really long time because interest rates are relatively low. But you just need to be aware of this. And think about it. If I could pay the points, maybe I could put more against the principal and take a lower mortgage. By the way, in the points vary from bank to bank. Different banks have different amount of points, and they reduce the interest rates by different amounts, and so it's all amazingly complex because of all the different banks. Okay, the adjustable rate mortgages. I know I already spoke about these a little bit in the definition, but it's important for you to understand the adjustable rate mortgages. Why? Because for first-time home buyers, this is something it's not thrust upon you, but it's offered as a suggestion because it's so much easier and it's so much faster and everything is, life is sweet and everything is good and we're trying to help you buy this house and this is how we're going to do it. Okay. But what they don't tell you is that the risk is on you. What they don't tell you is that your mortgage could double if they don't have a cap on it. Okay? And by the way, back in the 80s, we used adjustable rate mortgages because rates were at 13%. And by the way, the adjustable rate, remember mine was 13 1/8 at a fixed. At adjustable, you could get 10. I mean, it was 3 1/8 points lower. That's a ton. That's a lot of money that you saved, okay? There was only one problem. In approximately, I want to say 4 years, the adjustable rates had risen to 18%, which is currently a credit card rate, if you think about it. So notice, and by the way, a lot of people lost their homes then when it went up to 18%. So be aware of the adjustable. By the way, the documentation that's needed is usually less. Why? Because the risk is on you. The bank doesn't care if As long as you have enough information where they can give you the money. And remember this, I stated this in the first session. The banks, nobody's on your side. The banks don't care about you at all. All they want you to do is sign on the dotted line and they get the money. And if you don't pay, they will come after you, okay? ARMs usually have ceilings and floors. By the way, the adjustable rate mortgage, yes, it can go up to the 18%, but if rates had actually dropped down, they could have gone down. But listen carefully. There's usually a 1% floor or a 0.5% floor, which means it can only drop a 0.5%. And there's a 3% ceiling, which means it can go up from 4 to 7 or whatever. The point is you have to find that out, and again, it's different from each bank, okay? Now, here's the thing. If it's adjustable how? It has to be tied to something, right? I mean, it has to adjust based upon something. In the old days, up until around 2005 or whatever, we used to use the federal prime rate, which you hear on the news all the time. The federal prime rate has been raised or lowered, blah, 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 okay? But then the next thing that they also used was the Treasury bill rate. Now, the federal rate, the federal prime rate fluctuated substantially, but was pretty reasonable. The Treasury bill rate was like solid. I mean, yes, it still went up and down also, but much less than the federal prime rate. Okay, but then they came up with this new thing, not new, but it's a different measure. They came up with a thing called a LIBOR rate. LIBOR stands for the London International Bank Overnight Rate. This is the rate at which banks in the world lend each other money. Okay, the LIBOR, the London International Overnight Rate. And what that's for is that it's to help banks, like if a bank is short of money, they can call up the bank in London and get the money and they're charged X%. Okay, which is very similar to the federal prime rate, but it's set by a bank. Okay, by a bank. Now, here's the problem. The problem is that the LIBOR rate is a world rate. It's something that applies to the entire world. Okay, whereas the Treasury bill and the federal apply to the United States. Here's the amazing thing. When the federal rate in the United States was lowered, listen carefully because this is like crazy concept and crazy thought process. When the federal bank prime rate was lowered by Bernanke to help with the housing market, okay, the LIBOR rate went up because the federal prime rate, U.S. federal prime rate, went down, which therefore made the housing market worse. Does it get any better than that? The point I'm making is that if you're tied into the LIBOR rate, and by the way, how many people who sign these adjustable rate mortgages, how many even knew what the LIBOR rate is? I'll be honest with you. I do seminars around the country. There are CPAs that don't know what the LIBOR rate is. And by the way, there's no reason for them to know because their clients aren't involved in borrowing money, but whatever, for whatever reason. But my point is that here you have CPAs, you have educated people specialized in that. Even some financial planners don't know what LIBOR is because I talked to a couple of them. Why? Well, because 15 years ago, this came up in some of the accounting pronouncements that I was doing and teaching to CPAs, and I said, I have no idea what this is. And so I was talking to people, do you know what this is? And almost nobody knew. I mean, by the way, all the Fortune 500 companies, they all know what it was. Of course, all the banks know, blah, blah. But in my world, it wasn't something that I even had approached. Now, let's go back to the people who are buying their first house. Do they have any idea what LIBOR is? They do not. And they had no idea how volatile it was. And so they agreed to these things, and it turned out to be a major problem. All right. That's the end of this session. We look forward to talking to you in the next.